So this is part 2 of my videos about the singles that the Melvins put out in 1996. We put out one a month for the entire year of 1996, 12 singles, 24 tracks, and then later it was compiled into a CD that was put out maybe about a year later by Amphetamine Reptile. I'm not sure what kind of incarnations or releases it has had since. Maybe somebody can enlighten me on that. I would appreciate it. Okay, let's get started with single number 7, the A side of which is a song called Poison, written by legendary MC5 guitar player Wayne Kramer. Now, if you don't know anything about the MC5, you need to enlighten yourself and do some exploration. They were an incredibly revolutionary band in the late 60s that came from Detroit, Michigan. And they were absolutely amazing and powerful and left a lot of the audiences with their jaws just hanging open, and are really the precursor to modern American punk rock, I would say. They're definitely one of the foundation stones of all of that. And Wayne Kramer, in fact, the guitar player, was one of the foundation stones of the MC5. So this story is kind of one of those weird stories that would happen once you get bumped up into sort of the upper echelon of working with major labels and having a producer that knows a lot of people, namely Garth Richardson. So when we were doing Stoner Witch at A&M in '94 or something like that, Garth Richardson one day said, "Hey, what would you guys think about doing a track with Wayne Kramer of the MC5?" I don't think he even said MC5 because we knew who Wayne Kramer was. And we just went, "Really? Wayne Kramer is going to come down here?" And Garth said, "Oh yeah, he's a friend of mine and he's working on doing his first solo record. And so what do you think about doing a track with him?" And we just went, "Yeah, okay, let's have Wayne come over." And so Wayne came down to the studio one day when we'd kind of finished stuff, and he walks with his Stratocaster in a guitar case, no entourage, nobody else with him, maybe one other person with him or something, and was really friendly and a super nice guy. We kind of listened to the song. I think maybe he had a demo of Poison, and we listened to it and kind of figured it out really quickly. Wayne had his Stratocaster with him. We went into the live room. We already had bass and drums set up. Dale was going to play drums on it. I was playing bass on it. And Wayne was playing guitar on it. And I think eventually Wayne and Buzz both sang on it together. I don't think Buzz played any guitar on it. But it was quite an incredible experience. I think we maybe just had like a half stack in there, maybe a Rivera amp that belonged to Joe Barresi. Wayne comes in and plugs his guitar into this half stack, cranks it up, and we all just collectively went, there it was. That was the sound of the MC5. Right in our face, super loud. We kind of were shocked by that. It was just more proof that anybody who is a great player can plug into anything and they sound like them. So I think we ran through the song maybe 2 or 3 times or something. All of this took place really quickly. Maybe the 3rd time we even tracked it. I'm not even sure that Wayne overdubbed his solo. He might have just done like a live solo and then overdubbed a rhythm guitar track or something like that. And Joe knocked out a mix super fast. And that's the mix that is on the single number 7 of the singles that we did. So seek out that mix if you can. It's a little bit different than the mix that's on his solo album. And I think it's a better mix. I think it's a little bit more truer to the anarchic and kind of blistering sort of sound that the MC5 was known for. And Wayne in particular was a no-holds-barred guitar player who just went for it. So that was quite a amazing experience among others that would pop up as a result of just having Garth Richardson in place as co-producer on that. So a genuinely great experience to be able to play with Wayne. And of course, Wayne passed away recently, I think maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point. So God bless Wayne Kramer and the MC5 for bringing that kind of sound to music. The B-side of the 7th single that was put out in 1996 is called Double Troubled, and I'm not really sure about this. This seems like another special mix for an A&R person, and that's about all I have to say to it. I really have no memory of it, and I think a few of these were compiled just in my absence, which makes sense because so much material was being put out that there wasn't time to really wait for everybody to agree on something. And that's part of the beauty of a lot of these things. The 8th single that came out that year on the A side has a song called Specimen, and this is definitely me playing bass on this. It sounds like the bass is going through the legendary Love Tone Big Cheese box, as well as the DoD flanger, which I've talked about previously, the supersonic flanger. And there's some kind of a beat box on this. I'm not actually sure of the provenance of this particular recording. Maybe somebody can enlighten me out there. One of the super fans who has been so kind as to provide all this minutia related to a lot of this stuff from the distant past. So have a think about it. I know that Specimen is a favorite of quite a few people, and I remember this playing this live. I think sometimes we even started off a set with it, which was quite demanding because it's about a 8 or 9 minute instrumental which is filled with noise and is just very challenging to open a set with. So anyway, anybody out there who knows about where this came from, let me know. Side B of the 8th single is something called All at Once, and this oddly sounds like it has the bass line from I Flies, which is from the Melvins' very first record, Gluey Porch Treatments, which I did produce in 1986. It sounds like it has a lot of other weird stuff added to it, and also sounds like it might be another Joe Barresi mix for the powers that be. I think at this point the Joke was wearing extremely thin, so there were no surprises left at this point after hearing a cataclysm of terrible sounding mixes. Al Smith was probably ready to hear something real at this point. The single number 9 has an A side called Jacksonville and a B side called Dallas. These are two notorious live recordings that were captured, I think, on the L7 tour and also the 9 Inch Nails tour. I had a habit of recording almost every gig that I could. I had a small portable DAT recorder that I'd obtained when I worked at a place that supplied recording studios in London before I joined the Melvins to play with them. And so I was dragging this little thing around and recording everything I could. And these were a couple of recordings that came out of that mass of live recordings. So the A side is the Jacksonville side, and incredibly, I think this might be the very first show that was played on the tour that we did with L7. Maybe somebody can correct me out there. Might possibly be a Primus or Helmet opening show also. I'm a little vague on this, but I'm pretty sure that it's opening for L7. And I think it is actually the very first day of the tour. And I remember that first day because Dee, the drummer for L7, was under the weather with some kind of ailment, flu or something. And so she literally said, I don't think I can play the set. And it's the first day of the tour, and so everybody's kind of panicking. And Dale and the drummer from Wool, whose name was Chris, I think, just said, hey, we'll play the set for you, so you don't have to worry about it. So they, incredibly, in the afternoon, they sat down and started listening to the L7 set, and then during L7's sound check, they both got up there and kind of worked through the entire set. Melvins had our set down, so we just let them run through the set together, and that's what they ended up doing. Wool played, Melvins played, then L7 played, Dale played the first half, maybe Chris played the second half. Incidentally, Wool is a band that came out of the legendary DC band Scream, with Dave Grohl in it originally. And there's a whole other history to Scream, Wool, Pete and Franz Stahl, who played in those bands, and what they did afterwards. At any rate, when it came time for the Melvins to play our second slot after Wool, we were greeted extremely derisory. People were already yelling that they hated us. And so we might have started out trying to play the song Specimen, but this degenerated extremely rapidly, as anybody who's was at the show can remember. I'd love to hear some firsthand comments of people who were actually there, but the recording speaks for itself. It starts out with Buzz doing some kind of moaning and then going into a dialogue, not even a dialogue, a monologue with the audience, which he went into frequently, I think, during us supporting Helmet and at other times on this L7 tour, where he starts out, the audience is yelling, hurling insults at the band, and he goes into a monologue about, you know, when I'm sitting out in Hollywood, California, which I have lived in and wouldn't actually brag about, but he says, you know, I'm thinking about how amazing Jacksonville is and how amazing all the talent is that comes from Jacksonville. And of course, he's winding the audience up incredibly, and you can hear the fuck yous or whatever. And once the audience reaches a certain fevered pitch, Dale starts playing a beat, I start playing some nonsensical bass thing, and then eventually it kind of morphs into Buzz and Dale and I in a rousing chorus of, we hate you all and we want you to die. Fuck you. We hate you all and we want you to die. Fuck you. And of course, this is kind of a prodding to try and get the entire crowd to sing it along with us, which some people gleefully did. They were probably Melvins fans at this point on some of these shows in the antagonistic 90s. There'd be somewhat of a tumultuous thing happening within the crowd. There'd be a segment of the crowd that would be Melvins fans, a segment of the crowd that would be the headliners fans, and it would be extremely disruptive, and you really just didn't even know what was going to happen. This was before there was a pronounced security situation at concerts, and it was kind of a free-for-all. So when you're listening to this, you can either yell at the Melvins that you hate them, or you can join in and say, we hate you all and we want you to die, fuck you. So that's kind of a sort of a peak representation of the kind of things that we went through supporting people like White Zombie and Nine Inch Nails and L7, even a punk rock band, we still managed to extract some genuine hate from a punk rock audience, which is saying something at the time. And so that's the end of the A side, Jacksonville.
What's the matter?
B side, of course, is the legendary Nine Inch Nails Dallas show, which speaks for itself. I believe there's even some unreleased video of that opening slot for us, which was genuinely dangerous and ended up with people throwing things like 9-volt batteries and quarters and pens and just all kinds of stuff. I remember I got hit in the chest with a 9-volt battery from somebody and ended up like having a big bruise on my chest for about a month after that. Anyway, the Dallas show is legendary and infamous, and I've spoken about it before in the Nine Inch Nails video. Check out the Nine Inch Nails video I did talking about that tour and some of the things that occurred on it. Maybe something I left out was bowling with the Jim Rose Circus in Sioux Falls, which was a really fun time. We went to an empty bowling alley, and us and the Jim Rose Circus just went in and kind of owned the place, and it was a memorable and very enjoyable time. Single number 10 from that year has on the A side a demo for what is the Bloat that ended up on Stag. And this sounds to me like a very early kind of rough draft. It sounds like the bass and the drums are in place, but there's no slide guitar yet. This was recorded at the famous Sound City studio in Van Nuys, where many incredible records were made, including records by Ronnie James Dio, Pat Benatar. Rumors by Fleetwood Mac was recorded there. Side B of the 10th single is something called Fast Forward, and it's described as Buzz and Dale playing with a tape recorder. And that's what it sounds like. I don't think there's any story behind this. I don't really know the provenance of this particular track either. And so many things were recorded. Everything was recorded. There were running tapes whenever we were in the studio or practicing. So there's probably still a wealth of material that may never even be heard from again. I don't really know. I know that I have a lot of stuff that I haven't even gone through at this point 30 years later, so maybe I'll take a stab at it sometime before I shuffle off this mortal coil. The 11th single on the A side has a little tune called Nasty Dogs and Funky Kings, and this is a ZZ Top song. I always loved this song since I was a teenager and had a great love for ZZ Top, still have a very warm place for them. They're probably a band that I've seen more than any other band, I think maybe 13 or 14 times, starting in 1973. But I brought my enthusiasm for ZZ Top to the Melvins. They were already aware of ZZ Top somewhat, but I think I enlightened them to some of the deeper cuts in their background, and Nasty Dog Funky Kings is one of those tracks. It's the first track on their fourth album, Fandango, a tour which I actually saw in '74 or something like that. And we started messing around with this song at practices just for fun. It's a really fun song to play. When you're a teenager, you learn songs that are easy and enjoyable to play. That was one of the first songs I learned to play properly on the guitar when I was maybe 15 or something like that. So in the Melvins, we played that song frequently just for fun at practices, as I mentioned. And then we started to play it during quiet sets. We would do a laid back version of it. Incidentally, the bass part is a really fun part to play. It's got this great Dusty Hill grindy bass riff that goes over and over under the guitar solo. So I'm not sure where this little live recording came from. I know we used to play this song in record store appearances, and as I mentioned, when we played quiet sets, and sometimes as an encore just for fun. We also played Judas Priest songs, Alice Cooper songs, Flipper songs, Germ songs. The Melvins like to play cover songs because we like to play music, and I still even play cover songs with my band here in Austin just for fun, because you know what? It's fun to play music. The B-side of the 11th single is something called HDYF from 1996, which has something to do with somebody who played with Yoko Ono. I remember in 96 or 97, a request came through from Sean Lennon for the Melvins to play with him at some Yoko Ono thing at the Roxy in LA. I heard vaguely about this, and I was in London. It was during time off, and I didn't hear anything else about it. And then later I heard they went and played with Yoko Ono and Sean Lennon. So for some reason I was not invited to do that. Maybe it was too short a notice or something like that. So something I missed out on, but I'm not sure if I would have wanted to have been involved in porpoise screaming or shrieking, whatever Yoko was doing. But I think Sean was a Melvins fan and probably still remains one. People who tend to get on that train stay on it, for better or worse. And good for you fans out there. You are loyal, and no band could want for anything more. The 12th single that came out has an A-side called How minus plus plus minus Harry Lauder's Walking Stick Tree. And for you fans out there, you already know this as a song from the album Honky. And this was a combination of two songs. One was a kind of strange drum machine thing that Buzz came up with. And the other thing is a dirge-like guitar progression that I came up with completely separately in London. And the Harry Lauder Walking Stick Tree is a reference to a small miniature dwarf tree, which is actually a hazelwood tree, and it has all of these twisted branches to it and looks like a very kind of magical tree that you would see in a fairy tale or something. The actual name of it is Corylus contorta, and I love this tree, and I looked after it for the whole time that I had it in my garden. And the last time I went to London to visit the place that I used to live in, they had pulled the tree out, and so it was no longer there. But if you people in the northern climes want to plant a very interesting tree in your yard, go for the Corylus contorta. It's a very slow growing tree, and its nickname also is the Harry Lauder Walking Stick Tree. Harry Lauder was a Scottish singer in the early 20th century who sang songs like Roman in the Gloamin'. And he wore a kilt, and he had a walking stick made out of a hazelwood tree. So there's a pile of trivia about that particular song that you possibly don't want or need. But it's a fun little song. If you listen to just the guitar part or the beatbox part by themselves, you'll have two for the price of one. And that's all I've got on that song. B-side of the 12th single is a song called Zodiac, which I think comes from Bullhead, possibly. Once again, fans can enlighten me. And this song is actually covered by a band called Brutal Truth. It's the only song out of all of the 12 singles that is actually played by a different band. I don't know anything about Brutal Truth. Maybe the Melvins played a couple of shows with them at some point. But I salute you, Brutal Truth, for being on the 12th single out of all of these singles. So I hope you enjoyed the breakdown of all 24 of these songs. This was kind of a undertaking to me, especially as I've been under the weather. So it's an undertaking. It's also an under the weather undertaking. Remember that you can buy me a coffee. You can also join my Patreon channel for exclusive content. And please remember to like and subscribe to the channel because it helps the channel grow. Thanks. So thanks for sending in all of your questions about these Melvins singles 1 through 12. I am now going to answer your questions that you sent in. If I've already answered the question that you sent in the previous content related to all of these singles, then I will just be skipping that. Joe H952 says, not a question, just saying it's really cool you're making these videos. I'm really enjoying it. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. Sadcore SSS, which is John. Hey, John, how are you doing? Says, it seems like everything and the kitchen sink was thrown into this collection. Recordings from the 1983 lineup, Brutal Truth covering a song, Melvins covering a ton of other bands, including Clown Alley, live tracks, studio fuckery. Is there anything you wish would have made it or anything you know of that was considered but left off? This whole thing was kind of compiled outside of my purview. We sort of had some communication about what was going to be put out. I more or less agreed, and then things were put out without agreement. But there was a general consensus that anything was going to go, and everything did. Vector 2112 says, hi Mark, how did Double Troubled come about? I've always enjoyed the experimental noise aspect of the Melvins. Well, I'm not exactly sure how that came about. I think I mentioned that in the video, and yes, there was a lot of experimentation during my time actually playing with them, and that's just part of my general avant-garde sensibility, as you may know from my solo albums also, but thank you for your question. Leo Enterprises 101 asks, was Specimen fully conceived before it made it into set lists, or did it form more organically through live improvisation? Well, it actually did both. There would be long feedback periods when we were doing headlining slots, and things developed out of that. As I mentioned, we had a ton of live recordings, and also there was a lot of experimentation during practice. So Specimen is a result of more or less both of those kinds of things. And it got to the point where there was actually kind of an arrangement, albeit somewhat of an elastic arrangement. And I think there was a couple of tours where we actually opened with that. And it was quite challenging for the audience, as can be heard in the case of the Dallas show recording, possibly Jacksonville, but I'm pretty sure there was some tours where we did open with that. Once again, anybody who went to any of those tours, saw any of the shows, can enlighten me and the audience about that. Thank you for your question. Corey Fusting 9294 asks, I wanted to ask about HDYF with MIA and credited to Yoko Ono as a guest. The story on that track has a lot of conflicting info. I also learned Melvins did a set with Yoko Ono as a guest in '97, and I got to ask about that. Cheers. Well, thanks for your question, Corey. I did touch on that during the explanation of that particular track, and I'm a little hazy on that myself. I heard about that coming up. And then all of a sudden there was dead space about it, and then I heard that they had gone and done that at the Roxy in LA with Yoko. So I'm still a little vague on what happened, but thank you. Absent-Minded Aerospace 3967 asks, questions for 7-12. Were Jacksonville or Dallas already familiar jams? If they hadn't been released here, is it possible they would have become studio Melvins recordings? Highly possible, but improbable, I think. Was the ZZ Top cover ever played anywhere else? Would really love an updated Mark D solo rendition of this tune. Well, thank you. I don't think I'm going to cover any ZZ Top songs, but I certainly have some that are flavored like that. On my first album, there's a song called El Morocco, which definitely has some of the sub-bore in there of the ZZ Tops. And also the song Chihuahua has some of those flavors in there. And it lingers throughout my solo work, certainly. Absent-Minded Aerospace 9367 also asks, in reference to singles 1 through 6, who plays, sings, writes on In the Rain, where A&R mixes some form of malicious compliance, were there misgivings or discussions about releasing just alternative live tracks of albums tracks as singles? Well, as far as In the Rain, I've described that it was Dale and I singing. I wrote the song pretty much, wrote the lyrics definitely. As far as malicious compliance is concerned, I can't say that there was any malicious compliance. We were pretty much left to our own devices in the recording studio. All praise to the record company for doing that. And I would say it's more or less a result of the band being not a particularly valuable asset to the powers that be. And so we were left to play in our sandbox. And play in our sandbox we did. And we were not malicious in any particular way. This was strictly mischievous and having a little bit of juvenile tomfoolery more than anything else with our fine technical crew. Of an Anaconda asks, if I remember right, there's only one other featured artist, which is Brutal Truth's cover of Zodiac. Why have a cover band at all? Why not more? And also, Zodiac is my favorite Melvin song played live. The high-pitched noise at the bend now and back in the day is like the greatest live sound ever made from a guitar, so thanks for playing bass on that song live. Well, you're welcome. Probably it was just there was the amount of material that could be released, that was ready to be released, was just getting very slim. So I would imagine that's why it went out. And then also, as I mentioned, possibly Brutal Truth played some shows with the Melvins at some point, and it was some sort of a favor or just kind of a heads up, we like you guys type of thing, but nothing deeper than that, I would say. Hi on Ryan asks, was there any particular Britpop bands that drew the ire of Melvins enough to be the inspiration for In the Rain? There was a lot of ire drawn across the board for every single kind of music, I would imagine, by certain members who were particularly vociferous about things. And equally, bands that were loved by us at the time were also spoken about vociferously too. Queen, Ted Nugent, Leonard Skinner, whoever we happened to be listening to as we were traveling around, George Jones. So I don't think there was anybody who was particularly hated in the Britpop scene other than maybe Oasis, who are still controversial, I guess, on some level. I have no idea. Sarah Gray asks, Woot Woot, unfortunately I don't remember much about these singles, even though I have a few of the originals and have the CD. I still have the original shirt with the cover of the CD on the cover, so I suppose I don't really have any questions about these, but I did want to ask you, how did you feel about most of the original Melvin shirts selling for so much money now? Some of these shirts sell for $1,000 plus. Don't you wish you would have borrowed a few boxes from one of the many tours you were on back then. Wink, wink. Actually, well, thank you for your inquiry about all of that. Of course, something is only valuable to the person that covets it, and that person will pay any amount of money to acquire whatever it is they want to acquire, whether it's a $5,000 camera or a $1,000 t-shirt, etc. At one point I did have multiple copies of pretty much every single thing that was generated during my tenure with the band, and it was all in a couple of suitcases. And at the point where I was no longer in the band, I actually gave that material away to an individual who was an Ooper fan, who was pretty much gobsmacked by my gift to him. And he was going, "Are you sure you want to do this?" This was in 1998. And I said, "Yeah, absolutely I am." So I have no regrets about any of that stuff. I'm glad that it's still personally valuable to some people, has a lot of great memories attached to it. For me, I shed it much like a snake sheds a skin. Probably some of it's out there in the world floating around. I have no idea. And that is actually my last question that I received for all of you interested fans. And I'm always grateful for the interaction, and I do appreciate all of your questions. And I will get to other albums of mine, and I will also get to other albums that I've produced, worked on, had some vague connection with, and I might just talk about a record that I like at some point. So once again, you can buy me a coffee, you can support me through my Patreon page, you can also go to my Bandcamp page and buy physical copies of my solo albums, and I'm on all the major platforms if you want to stream my material that way. And thank you for your support, and remember to like and subscribe because it helps the channel. Adios.